This channel's normal programming will resume shortly. In the meantime, I want to make a case for why a certain IP should be developed into another form of media. In recent years, there has been a long-anticipated resurgence of gaming properties being adapted into traditional media. While it is still hard to say if big house studios can handle intellectual gaming properties in a way that is more respectful to their source material than during any other time this craze has been followed, looking at you, Resident Evil. Recently, there is much more reason to feel optimistic, with classic game characters like Sonic and Nathan Drake getting theatrical releases with mostly positive receptions, and series like The Last of Us and Halo being picked up by major streaming services and adapted into big live-action productions. It's about time some more video game properties are brought into the mix. But one in particular has been yearning for it. Half-Life did what Citizen Kane did for cinema to video games. The original that was released in 1999 and its 2004 sequel are widely regarded as some of the most important games ever created. Both are acclaimed for changing how people see stories in interactive media, as well as establishing many of the narrative trends that would come to define the current age of gaming, the foremost of which would be world building. Half-Life's world remains as one of the most mysterious and terrifying settings in all of science fiction. The game depicts a bleak Orwellian dystopia that encompasses many themes such as science gone wrong, cosmicism, and free will and choice, all underlined by a commitment to horror and raw, unfiltered violence, with plenty of disturbing visuals in between. By drawing inspirations from 1984, Stephen King's The Mist, and Children of Men, only to name a few, Half-Life has remained etched into the minds of those who have played it and gaming culture at large. So in order to understand its broader appeal and why it has such great potential for stories outside of gaming, I want to give you a brief overview of what Half-Life is about. Half-Life's story begins on one fateful day at a top-secret research facility in New Mexico. A physicist testing a newly discovered element accidentally tears a dimensional rift in space that results in extra-dimensional beings teleporting all throughout the facility. The facility is locked down with the scientists inside still trying to desperately escape. When word of the disaster gets to the Pentagon, they naturally send in the military. The scientists are relieved at first, believing that they're going to be saved, only to discover that the soldiers sent to save them are actually there to contain them. Eventually, the military is unsuccessful at containing the situation, and the portals begin to spread outside of the facility. In a matter of only a couple of hours, portal storms begin to pop up all over the planet, creating a global crisis that will leave billions dead by the time it's over. Almost immediately, a technologically advanced species of aliens begin appearing through the portals. Referred to as the Combine, they are a massive empire that spans countless parallel universes and ruthlessly subjugates any race that opposes them. They begin their conquest of our planet immediately. It would take them merely 7 hours to completely overwhelm and occupy Earth, prompting humanity to surrender and subsequently to be enslaved. In the few years following this, Earth becomes unrecognizable. Humans now live under the oppression of their alien overlords in cordoned-off cities. By restricting food and water, assigning miserable living quarters, tearing families apart, and using suppression fields to prevent human procreation, the Combine ensures the omnicide of humanity. People live under the blanket of the worst kind of tyranny imaginable, with constant threat of executions and the daily routine of gruesome beatings by the ruthless police force. If word of your misgrievances make their way to the Combine, you can expect to be arrested in the middle of the night and sent off to one of many mysterious prisons, only to be interrogated, mutilated, and transformed into a biological puppet whose labor will be exploited for whatever the Combine deem fit. If citizens want a shot at a better life, there is very little in the way of options. Most volunteer for the Combine's police force, where they are given status and authority over regular citizens, as well as plenty of incentives to be brutal towards them. It goes without saying that they are despised by ordinary people, but no more than the Overseer, a Combine sympathizer that was instrumental in negotiating for peace during the invasion of Earth. In his position as a representative for humanity, he acts as the mouth of the Combine's propaganda machine that he broadcasts from the imposing citadel that towers over Earth's new capital, City 17. If you want to escape, life outside of the cities isn't much better. The Combine has picked Earth to the bone, depleting its resources in their goal of conquering the multiverse. Oceans are dried up, and the portal storms have resulted in all kinds of extraterrestrial life to migrate into the wilderness. Face-hugging parasites that turn their still sentient host into mutilated zombies ravage small settlements. Hordes of 9-foot-tall insectoids tear apart anyone who travels on foot. Things are void of much hope in this future. However, among the recesses of the cities and in the corners of the countrysides, some still remains, as a scattered network of resistance fighters wage an unwinnable war of guerrilla tactics against their oppressors, all with the hope of discovering technology that can be used against them. This all sets the stage for Half-Life's integral conflict, a desperate struggle of insurmountable odds against the backdrop of a dystopian world filled with all kinds of scientific horrors and secrets littered throughout, not to mention some of the most charismatic and distinctive characters found in its medium, some of which are more elusive than others.
When you see your father, relay these words. Prepare for unforeseen consequences.
Few worlds in science fiction paint as dark a picture of the future as Half-Life does, which is why it is seemingly so fascinating and brimming for a game-to-screen adaptation. But what is even more telling is its obvious appeal to so many. Despite only 2 mainline entries in the franchise, the game has attracted millions of fans, many of which have created elaborate projects to express their passion and to explore the many sides of its world that aren't chronicled in the mainline games. These have been getting made for years now, going back to the early 2000s, and from all over the world. They include web live-action short films, mini-series, hundreds of animations, fan-developed games that take place within the universe of Half-Life, and even unofficial graphic novels of surprising quality. However, despite so much interest in the series, it has been unjustifiably neglected to the point of fan outrage. The game's developer, Valve, has only recently developed a spin-off after 14 years since the last mainline iteration, and in all that time, there has been virtually zero effort to develop an extension of this franchise in a format outside of video games, which is almost as depressing of a fact as the world the game depicts. Which brings us to the point of telling you all this. It's about time Half-Life's world was introduced to a wider audience, and to do that, it needs a format that can do it justice. Bear in mind that Half-Life is a game that is unique for having very little exposition and opts to allow the player to discover the intricacies of the world for themselves by having it slowly unfold in front of them. For that reason, a sense of discovery is essential, and this requires a medium that can account for time and pacing. There are 2 schools of thought behind this. The first is pretty cut and dry. By translating the story of the first game that follows the protagonist trying to escape the research facility into an action/horror movie that follows in a similar vein to Die Hard, The Raid, or 2012's Dread. There was talks of this happening back in 2003, but fortunately, it didn't have to share the same fate as Doom 2005 or any of the Resident Evil movies. Or more ambitiously, and more preferably, a mini-series with an original story that transpires during humanity's oppression and the resistance movement that follows it. A one-time series is by far the most favorable out of the 2 for any fan, as it would inherently be able to keep the scope of any potential story relatively contained. Half-Life's world is far too rich to explore in its entirety, without hijacking the primary storyline from the games. Additionally, the format of traditional seasonal TV may make exploiting it an easy temptation. So while dystopian settings are a dime a plenty for regular seasonal TV formats, as well as just about every streaming platform, Half-Life is just not suited to it. It's important to note that a major part of why Half-Life is such a cultural phenomenon is for how it has avoided crapping out sequels and stretching out its plot despite being marketable enough to do just that. Instead, it's always used its releases to push the story forward in a delicate and thoughtful manner. so any kind of major production would have to show that kind of consideration into making something that has similar, long-lasting appeal. At the same time, a miniseries has the added benefit of a much longer runtime to allow for a fleshed-out story that could unravel with its world-building at a pace that feels befitting of the games. Another important aspect of this idea is that there is absolutely no need to create its own continuity. Paramount's Halo unfortunately fell into this trap, and it was one of the major reasons behind it being universally panned by the people it was made for. As to the means of doing this, HBO, with the aid of Warner Brothers, seems to be the ideal candidate for airing such a project, as HBO in specific has made a great reputation on aiding in the development of adapting stories for the small screen, and never intervening when those properties want to show delicate subject matter. And with writers/producers like Craig Mazin, who is currently helming The Last of Us, demonstrating how he can master the balancing act of tone and story that comes with the complicated and distressing subject matter as something like the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown, I imagine him to be perfectly suited to develop Half-Life into a story for the small screen. But let's not make our expectations too specific. Half-Life is a stupendously neglected property. Its story and world are like no other, and its legendary status in pop culture would make it an alluring proposition for anyone even remotely familiar with it.
In the meantime, this is where I get off.